Well, welcome everybody to the AI Pulse podcast by ABBYY. I'm here today at the beautiful Emirates Stadium where Arsenal and Arsenal women play. We're at the ABBYY AI Summit specifically, and I've got a great guest with me, which is Alexander Hanff. And we're really excited about the podcast today. So let's dive right into it.
Sure, I'm Alexander Hanff. I'm a computer scientist for over 30 years. I've been working in privacy for the last almost 20 years, specifically focused on EU law, privacy, data protection, ethics, and fundamental rights. I'm also a lawyer. I have a master's in law, focused on privacy, cybersecurity, and data protection. And yeah, it's my life's work. It's something I really enjoy doing, and it's a great pleasure to be here with you today, man.
Well, I mean, it's purely by coincidence that we're actually here, and I think it's a great way to start the podcast actually today to just explain a little bit how we got here in a short amount of time. So we're both in Brussels, airport lounge. Alex was sitting in my seat that I usually sit in.
You're going to stick to that, aren't you?
I am going to stick to that. I am going to stick to that. And yeah, we just got to talking, and we were both in the AI space. You were specifically in privacy, ethics, compliance, and I'm more on the business side of things when it comes to artificial intelligence. But yeah, it's been wonderful getting to know you and actually learning a lot about that particular component of it. So I've actually been really glad to have met you. And we had a lovely panel session today. Fireside chat here at the AI Summit with ABBYY. And I would love to also touch on a couple of those topics actually right now for this particular episode of the podcast.
I think it's very important that we validate and verify what technology is doing, especially considering that I'm not actually here, I'm dead, as a result of ChatGPT saying that I died in 2019. So hi everybody from the other side. But there are some very serious ethical questions to be asked. For example, if we're going to start pushing all of these mundane jobs for verification into countries where the cost of labor is incredibly low and exploit that and exploit the human rights abuses that come with that, then I think we have some very serious questions to ask as to whether that is the type of society we want to live in moving forward, and if that's how we want to use technology to empower us as a society. And I don't think many of us actually would like to live in that type of environment.
No, I certainly wouldn't. It reminds me of a lot of sci-fi movies that I've seen that don't always turn out very well. But I mean, it's kind of a negative spin on AI, but I also want to touch on a positive spin on AI. Another thing that was in the news recently was actually about the fact that using artificial intelligence, there's a project that is able to spot missing cancers that have been detected inside of mammograms specifically, and doctors had missed them. So this is another shape of AI that is actually helping our society, that is helping people directly in achieving a next level of health, which I think is massively important. So there is that kind of dualism of look, we've got some negative aspects, also got very positive ones. So I love reading that kind of news of how to positively use AI in a way that it does serve a very specific purpose. And is that the kind of thing that you're looking for? Is that where you're hoping that we're going to have more and more of as time progresses?
Yeah, I think it's really interesting to see some of the innovation that we're seeing from AI. And as we already discussed earlier today, I work for a med tech company who are using similar technology in their mammogram machines that they actually put out to market. And it's incredibly empowering from their perspective to be able to protect women's health in this way and provide a high quality service. But it's not something that happened overnight. I mean, if you go back to 1997 when I was at university, one of my housemates was doing his PhD specifically on this issue, on image recognition for cancer cells. So you're talking a long time ago, nearly 30 years ago, and this technology has now made it into the commercial world that we live in. But when you look at things like the modern large language models and the emergence which we've seen over the past 2 years, we're seeing incredibly rapid advances being claimed by these companies, where actually the foundations to build these advances have been going on for decades.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you look at the transformer architecture, which is the basis for a lot of the things that people now know really, really well, that's, if I'm not mistaken, the first kind of principles are date back all the way to the 70s, 80s. But we just didn't have the computing power or the data at the time to get to where we are today. Another interesting fact on the usage of AI in the medical space in healthcare was that, studies have shown that up to 77% of the time that's being spent on preventative care, and actually 47% on chronic care, can be outsourced now when we combine people with AI, to actually get to that next level of medical care for everybody. Because right now, I think definitely we saw through COVID that sector is under so much stress. It's often underfunded depending on where in the world we are. So I think actually it makes for a beautiful combination. So I'm quite hopeful that not just in medical devices, but also just in general, we'll be able to employ more people in that field so that everybody can get better access to, very good clinical care and just care in general.
Absolutely, and it's interesting you touch on COVID, because I'm not sure if you read the news just last week, but there's been a new use of AI in detecting the causes of long COVID.
Oh, no, I haven't read that yet.
So there's some pneumonia, bacterial pneumonia has been detected as one of the causes of the loss of life during COVID, the people who had a particularly bad reaction, but also for long COVID. And they've been using the AI to analyze the images of those scans to be able to discover potential causes of why so many people died and why so many people have had adverse effects since taking their vaccinations with the long COVID over the past couple of years. So, there's a lot of benefits to come from technology. And as a technologist, I really do support the use of technology for empowerment and for creating a better world and for social good. But with that comes a lot of responsibility,
Sure.
And we need to be accountable for how we use these systems and ensure that they are being used appropriately. And as we've said many times, technology is agnostic. When we create technology, the technology isn't responsible for how it's being used.
No,
we're responsible for how it's being used.
Yep. We're the problem.
Yep.
Basically we are. And so to take it, I think that it's an interesting topic, and just to take it into the business world just a little bit. I was presenting at a customer event a couple of weeks ago. And there we had a really interesting discussion that got started by the fact that, and we've all heard, I've heard it as recently as just 2 days ago when I checked into my hotel here, and they double charged my credit card. So I had to call the customer line of the credit card issuer, and to figure a couple of things out. And at the start of that conversation, I had an option. It said, this conversation may be recorded for training purposes. Are you okay with that, or are you not okay with that? So we've all heard that, and the interesting conversation that existed or started at this event was, well, we're thinking about using that recording to actually start transcribing, summarizing, and extract information to further help complete the profiles of our customers. Now, the interesting thing is, for me, it's about the fact that when I hear that sentence, I hear training as in training other people to do the customer service job, and not train AI on doing all sorts of things that they could do with that data. So what's your take on those tiny little semantics that now these certain statements are taking on entirely new dimensions?
Yeah, I mean, we have social concepts which have existed for as long as the telephone has been in our homes and not a luxury for the wealthy, where calls being recorded means that somebody is going to record the call for humans to listen to.
Mm-hmm.
And as you rightly said, now we have to really think hard about what the definition of training is in the world of AI, because we know that pretty much every large AI system that's being developed by these massive global corporations are hungry for data, right? And they reaching the point where there simply isn't enough new data to help them keep evolving the models. Yeah. It's an issue which has become quite serious over the past couple of months. So of course they're going to try and find new sources for data, and some of that data is going to be, as you just rightly said, other types of training material, whether that be audio material, whether that be recording phone calls or recording people in the streets with IoT, smart CCTV cameras, etc., etc. All of this data is, we have to assume, is going to be used at some point to train AI. I worked on a research project in Sweden a couple of years ago where we were looking at the incidental capture of personal data through smart devices and delivery drones and things like that.
Yeah.
Smart cities, cameras, smart buildings, etc., which capture massive amounts of personal data every single minute of every single day, because people walk past these cameras or past these sensors and they get caught up in the processing as a result, even though they're not the intended target for the type of monitoring that these are set up for. So we created a system which would redact personal data from those recordings, so blur faces
Yeah.
or mute voices, et cetera, so that the companies who are deploying these technologies wouldn't be in a situation where they have the compliance burden that comes with having all of that personal data. So, we use AI for that. We use AI specifically to identify where that data was appearing within the data stream and taking it out. So there's some very strong uses there, but at the same time, that data has to come from somewhere, and we had to train the model based on quite a lot of video footage in public spaces that we'd acquired, legally speaking, in order to be able to train the model to detect future instances of personal data being caught in those situations. So, we have to assume nowadays, as a result of the huge trend around AI now, as a result of ChatGPT and similar models, that everything we do, everything which is monitored, is at some point going to be used for training purposes. And there's no transparency around this currently. There was no transparency from OpenAI when they trained their GPT models. There's no transparency. Google just got fined 250 million euros for training their model in a way which was not considered as lawful. And if there's no transparency, there's no equity. And if there's no equity, then there's no accountability and there's no fairness and all these other things that we need to have in a collaborative society. It's a case of we're doing all the giving, they're doing all the taking, and all we get in return is some cute cat pictures or some nursery rhymes for our kids at night. Yeah.
Yeah, no, but it's an interesting fact that you mentioned in your answer, which is that we used AI to control the data that's going to go to AI. And I think this is definitely something that here today at the AI Summit that we've been talking about, is that, look, there's so many different variations of AI besides what is currently well-known mainstream in the market, that can actually help solve some of these problems, like you just mentioned. Now, you did give me some Minority Report vibes when you were explaining the whole process that was going on there, but I'm glad that it all turned out you were involved, so all the faces got blurred, and now it's much better. But it does lead me into the next topic that we also touched on, which is, artificial intelligence. There's a big divide in what people think. I think that's also due to a lack of knowledge or belief in the overstatements that have been made. So the more, philosophical question almost is AI here to replace all of us, or is it going to enhance us as people personally, or even as a society? For me personally, I mean, I use artificial intelligence in all different kind of shapes and sizes. I use ABBYY's purpose-built AI to help me do very tedious tasks around documents and figuring out, okay, how our process is working, both for myself within the organization as for customers. But then additionally, specifically generative AI, it's been a really great journey to learn how to work with that tool, because it is a tool in the end, that you have to learn and understand, just like everything else. And it's been a really great way to help me brainstorm, to create new creative ideas. So for me personally, I would say AI is enhancing us, but I'm really curious to get your perspective on it.
It depends on us, really, at the end of the day. As we said before, the technology is agnostic. It's how we use it, which is what is going to create impact. And that impact can be either positive or it can be negative. Or it can be neutral. There could be a zero-sum impact in certain circumstances. So I think, we need to be vigilant as to how we're using these technologies and where we're using these technologies and for the purposes that we're using them for. I started a generative AI company back in 2019, creating synthetic data as a privacy enhancing technology. Because at the moment, as you know, many companies collect massive amounts of personal data for predictive modeling and various other big data analytics, etc. And my idea was, well, if we can use generative AI to make cool looking hooks that hang from the ceiling, then we can use generative AI to create personal data which doesn't relate to any real person. And then we can use that data to train these algorithms and various other purposes that the big data is being used for, without having the harm and the burden of compliance by having real personal data. The problem I faced was the board that I brought on to work with me with that company were more focused on rapid revenues than they were on ethics. I was very much focused on ethics, surprise, surprise. And I ended up having to leave the company as a result, because I couldn't have my name associated with a product which was being developed in an unethical way. So I lost my big ticket opportunity in the AI world to do something which actually would have been really useful and would have helped a great deal companies with their compliance issues that they have today. So, I like to be positive. I like to be an optimist, and I genuinely think, and the reason why I work in privacy is because of my passion for technology, not because I'm anti-technology, but I want to see technology used for good and to empower people and to give people the same opportunities that it gave me and gave you and
Yeah,
other people
absolutely.
in our generation. Although, I mean, you're not in my generation, but
I'm far from it, but
close,
okay.
close. You know, so I want to see technology used for good. I want to see technology enhancing people's lives as opposed to overtaking their lives. And I genuinely think that if we're careful, you know, we take the care to set up the guardrails and make sure that we're using the technologies in ethical ways, then it will be used to enhance. But as I said in our discussion this morning, I saw a meme on social media just a couple of weeks ago where they were saying, you know, they gave us AI and it's supposed to take over all the nasty jobs so we can focus on art and literature, but all it's doing is doing art and literature and we still have all the nasty jobs to do, right?
Yeah.
And that touches again on what you were saying about Amazon and the workers in India, where, you know, offshoring those jobs that nobody else wants to do so that we can introduce AI into an environment which is taking away other people's jobs. It's not probably the way that we should be going, in my mind.
No, it's not the way that I think, you know, most people envision it moving in that direction. And you know what I said this morning as well was, look, it's in the end, the technology is agnostic. The technology itself is not the problem. It's how we're going to use it. And I've been having really interesting discussion around deepfake, for example, and how that can really fool people. And I think especially people that are not educated in the technology itself. So, you know, you and I, we live and breathe it every single day. And even if there are things that we don't know, even though we try our very best to do. You can only imagine how difficult it is, the speed at which technology is evolving right now for people that weren't born into it, that did not have access to it at a young age, still don't have access to it. And suddenly you have your son, your daughter's voice speaking to you on the phone. And you're like, okay, this must be them. They sound like them. They talk like them. So I need to help them out. So yeah, I think it's going to be an interesting evolution that we'll have to watch. I am quite hopeful, quite optimistic, just like you, but we'll need a lot of, I would say, education from people that are very passionate about this particular topic, like yourself, to really, you know, instill that kind of sense of righteousness almost, to say, well, this is how you're supposed to do it, this is the purpose that it's supposed to have, and try to mitigate, you know, any of the, you know, wrong usage of the technology itself, because the technology is not the problem. It's gonna even help solve part of the problems. So yeah, that's great.
I mean, I was very lucky. I grew up in the age of Ridley Scott and Isaac Asimov and, you know, all the great science fiction that we
Yeah.
had in the 70s, 80s and early 90s. And, you know, if you think back to Blade Runner and Tears in the Rain, the scene with Rutger Hauer towards the end of the movie,
Yeah.
where he's literally crying in the rain as he realizes that his own mortality as an you know, an automaton, as a you know, a non-human being. Whereas previously he thought that he was going to live forever, and he didn't realize he'd had this safety protocol implanted into him to shut him down after a certain period of time. You know, and you look back on things like that as a child watching those movies, and they were incredibly emotive, right? And when we look at technology, how we develop technology in the modern world, it very much replicates how we saw technology in science fiction, right? So if you look at robots, for example, we're constantly trying to make robots more human-like so that we can relate to them. So if you think back to AI, the movie, the original AI movie with the teddy bear and the little boy,
Yeah.
which I watched again recently and was still equally as moving. And you see the way that he reacts to the environment that he's in as he's learning how to try and be more human. If you look at Data in Star Trek Next Generation, we had that similar emotional growth as he was trying to understand how to express emotion as a non-human being, but as a sentient AI. And you know, so I was kind of lucky in that respect, because we had all these warnings then, back then in the 70s and the 80s and the early 90s. The current generation don't really have that benefit. They're thrust into this world of technology, and they have to coexist with it immediately without having any understanding of potential consequences, the dystopia or the utopia, whichever way you want to look at it, and how to manage those situations. So I think there's a lot of talk around, so for example, with my ChatGPT situation killing me, and I wrote an article about it, and everybody was accusing me of anthropomorphizing, and I'm like, well, we're not anthropomorphizing. The people who are creating these technologies are anthropomorphizing. They're trying to mimic humans. So if they're trying to mimic humans, it's only natural that we're going to see them as human-like.
Yeah.
Right? So you can't criticize people for seeing something in the way that it's designed to look and the way it's designed to work.
And they've even taken that one step further. Just yesterday, they launched a new version of GPT-4 Omni, which gives human-like responses in the amount of time that it takes a human to respond. Yep. So that's exactly to your point, that it is continuing to develop in that direction. So you can't really blame anybody for thinking that it is that kind of intelligence that you're actually talking to. And I think I love the Star Trek references, obviously, but the example of Data, right? It's a very long journey that he's going on to be able to get to that point to even understand some of the very complex concepts.
Even up to the recent new series of Picard, where we saw Data come back, and he was still struggling with these emotional turmoils of trying to understand what it is to be human. And this is 20, 25, 30 years on.
Yeah. And so, like I said, it's going to be a really interesting journey about how we're going to continue to work with this technology that's so rapidly evolving, faster than I've ever seen it before. I don't know about you, but I've never seen it move so fast. It's always moved fast, but not this fast. And how we as a society, how we as people are just basically going to deal with it. But after all, I would love to dive in more into all the sci-fi movies, which, by the way, I think is interesting that you mentioned that, because not everybody loves that genre, but it is quite educative to think about, like you said,
now,
the utopia and the dystopia of what it could possibly be, because it does give some kind of insights into, okay, this is where it could go, because we have thought about it. So anybody that's watching, definitely go see all of those kind of things if you want to learn about the possibilities. But the other bit is that I do want to brag to the last topic a little bit on the business side, because that's what we're here for today. And one of the things that we shared with the audience earlier during our session on the summit was, okay, what are the absolute best practices from you as an expert that you would want to share, with somebody that you meet, with somebody that comes to talk to you, that you had people talking to you today. You're like, okay, what are your best practices that you want to share that they should take away from both being here at the summit and also from listening to the podcast today?
I think that the most important thing is human oversight, human validation, and human verification. They're certainly, from my perspective, the most important things. If we go back to the ChatGPT killing me, it's a funny story. I tell the story and I laugh about it, and my friends laugh about it, and we've laughed about it together. But the reality is, it could have actually been much more serious. And the points that I made when I wrote about this was that the specific situation where it occurred wasn't damaging. It was something that I could have a little bit of fun with. But the reality was, if I'd been applying for a job and the recruitment agency were using an LLM to vet those resumes, then I wouldn't have got the job, because the LLM would have told me I was dead. If I was applying for a mortgage or a loan or some other social system that I needed to be validated for or vetted for in some way, then there's a potential that I could have been investigated for fraud or identity theft, because the GTP system told them that I was dead. And so these consequences tend to be overlooked when we're looking at these situations, and everybody's quick to jump on the trend, the bandwagon, as we've seen with ChatGPT. Literally True. Within days, nobody was talking about anything but large language models. And everybody went from being a metaverse expert to being an AI expert overnight, right?
GPT-1 came out in 2017. Yeah. I had no idea. I had to look that up. I had absolutely no idea. So I think you're absolutely right on that point.
So we've got to be really careful not to see AI or the output from AI. And keep in mind that these AIs, they're not constructive AIs like the types of AIs that ABBYY are working on. These are large language models. They're generic. They're designed specifically to regurgitate information in a way that is human-like, which is why we have all these hallucinations, because, as we said earlier today, garbage in, garbage out. These models were trained on massive data sets which came from the internet and various other places where there's a lot of garbage, right? There's a lot of misinformation, there's a lot of disinformation, there's a lot of subjective information, and it's not it's not the Encyclopedia Britannica, if we're going to be honest, right? So there's a lot of garbage in there, and as a result we see what the industry are trying to call hallucinations, which is basically just their way of saying it's not accurate, right? And then they expect us to be responsible for how we interpret that and how we use that. But if you never know what is accurate and what isn't accurate, how are you supposed to interpret that in a way which is useful and in a way which is going to be ethical and protect people? So it's really important that we don't take what is coming out of these large language models as absolute truth, that we verify, that we use them as tools to assist, but we don't allow them to make decisions, that we validate everything which is coming out of them. This is not just from an ethical perspective, but also from a legal perspective. Under Article 22 of the GDPR, automated decision making with legal or other significant effects is not permitted without consent, right? So the last part of that, other significant effects, is a very subjective phrase. It's not defined in any way. That's how it is in the text of the law. So every company that's using AI is an automated system. If you're using that AI to make decisions, then you'll make it automated decisions under Article 22 of the GDPR, and you can't do that, lawfully speaking, unless you have consent. And as we know, most companies are using ChatGPT for all sorts of things for which they probably don't have consent from the...
And that does bring me on the little sidetrack before we wrap up of accountability, because there is this belief that, if we're using a third party for an LLM, then we're kind of shifting the accountability to them quite often. So I think that's definitely also something to take into consideration when you're getting started on this kind of journey, whether best practices. Well, make sure that you take that into account. You can't shift accountability. You're still accountable as an organization for how you're using AI. What I would say is...
We see this accountability shift all the time in technology. I mean, going back to the previous revolution, which is the introduction of cloud.
Yeah.
I was speaking at a Microsoft event in London several years ago now, talking about accountability in cloud environments. Who's responsible in the case of a breach or loss of data in a cloud environment? And the amount of companies who believed that they weren't accountable because it's the cloud that's responsible for it, but legally speaking, they are the ones who are accountable. And it's the same thing with AI now, and it will be the same thing with the next trend that comes along, probably metaverse or some other virtual reality environment in the future, because it kind of got leapfrogged by ChatGPT at the moment. And we'll see the same trends over and over again, where this lack of accountability, where we try and offset responsibility and accountability to other entities because, well, everybody's using them, so they must be safe, right?
Yeah.
So it's a very valid point, and one that we need to be very much aware of, not just from as I said, from an ethical perspective, but from a legal obligation and compliance perspective as well.
Yeah, and so I think that's a very good best practice to call out. And I think for me, how I translate that into something that I actually also recommend to people that I talk to, but more from a technical perspective, perhaps, is look, combine the right technologies together. There's certain use cases that we haven't been able to do that we're now able to do because we do incorporate the positive aspects of a large language model in the right use cases, but for only like a small percentage of the overall capability that we're looking for. And we're making sure that there's the right guardrails so that they can have these hallucinations, that we are using them for their more reasoning capabilities was what we're seeing. And that really allows to make a big difference if you're putting the technology together in the right way for the right purpose. And I think that's also a lot of what people have been taking away from the summit today, is that is the way to go, and that is the way that we should keep thinking about it.
This is also why it's so important to have expertise either within the organization or consulting for the organization on what is the appropriate use of the technology and what is the appropriate model of technology. As has been discussed here today at this event, ABBYY specialize in creating models which are for specific purposes, as opposed to general models like ChatGPT. They use a lot less power for training. Their output is way more reliable, a lack of hallucination as opposed to hallucination being the norm. You're not going to be suffering issues of model collapse because the data you're using is specific and limited, as opposed to this constant drive for more and more data. And it's relevant to the organizations. From a security perspective and an intellectual property perspective as well, you've got much more security there because you're training models for companies who have a specific purpose and you're training on their data. So they don't need to be concerned that their data is now going to get sucked up into ChatGPT who have accidentally toggled we will use your data for training with their new update.
It's just a bug.
Just a hallucination.
Yeah.
Yeah. And from an ethical perspective and sustainability and environmental perspective, it's a positive effect as well, because as we said again this morning, it's been suggested that it takes a swimming pool of water to manage a single prompt on ChatGPT, whereas the models that you're creating are using the equivalent power to a Google search, right? Which is minuscule compared to ChatGPT. So making sure that you're using the right tools for the job is just as important as making sure you're using them ethically, because you have the sustainability factors to take into account. And we also, if you look at the OpenAI model, they basically scrape the entire internet to train their models. There's no question that in many jurisdictions that was illegal. Right? They didn't have a legal basis to do that, and we're seeing the consequences of that for them now in the litigations which are ongoing around the world. But we can't simply get rid of those models now, right? Because the amount of energy that it took to train those models in the first place, we will not be meeting our environmental responsibilities if we then just allow that to be deleted and go to waste. But neither should they be permitted to keep the fruits of their dishonest activities. Right?
True.
So what do we do? So we start looking at more functional, more specified, more direct and focused models, which don't create these environmental issues that we're seeing, which are more purpose specific and don't require you to then look at your ethical situation and think, well, am I meeting my corporate social responsibility requirements by using a model which has quite clearly been trained on lawfully and ethically and has had a huge environmental impact as a result, and continues to face the same impact over and over again because it's a general model. It's a foundational model and it needs more and more and more data. And there's a finite amount of data out there. We thought there was a massive amount of data, but it's rapidly running out.
There's not, because I even read somewhere that if you boil down everything that's available to uniqueness, that's only 20% left. So you can imagine the hunger that they have for indeed more data in any shape or size. It's interesting. I think it's an amazing journey that we're on, and I loved having this conversation with you, Alex, for the second time today, but it was just as good. We touched on some new topics, so that was fun. And thank you for agreeing to do this bit on the podcast as well in the beautiful stadium that we're in.
It's a beautiful day.
It is a beautiful day. It's a wonderful day. So thanks again.
It's hard not to be positive on a day like this as well. But the box is open, right? Pandora's box is open. The lid's not going to be closed. So we need to accept that the technology is here and it's here to stay.
It is.
So now we have to learn how to use it appropriately, use it fairly, use it ethically, and ensure that it's used for the betterment of society, as opposed to just making a few elite people incredibly rich.
Couldn't agree more.
Thanks
for coming on. Thank you, man.